When I look at the way weight management is being delivered in so many settings at the moment, I really actually just want to bang my head off the nearest wall, because the level of deliberate ignorance that's been baked into the system is actually really beginning to hack me off. We are treating trauma, emotional eating and binge eating as though they live in some completely separate room down the corridor with the sign mental health on the door, while weight management over here gets on with calories, medication, movement, metabolic markers and outcome measures. And all of that is relevant, but it's never going to stick if you haven't done the deeper work. And I'm sorry, but that model is just not good enough anymore, because the person sitting in front of you, their body doesn't divide itself up into neat little departments like that. Their nervous system is connected to their relationship with food. Their relationship with food is connected to their stress response. Their stress response is connected to their trauma history. And yet, the service model treats everything as it's something completely separate. So what happens is they're shocked when the person plateaus for no obvious reason, or they disappear from the service with no explanation, or maybe they do okay. They leave the service, but then they return, having regained all the weight that they lost. So what if the weight management services have been looking at this all wrong? What if, instead of seeing the weight as the problem, the default is that the weight, or what resulted in the higher weight, was actually doing a very important job for that person? Dr. Vincent Folletti's work is still one of the clearest examples of why this matters. In his obesity program back in the 70s and 80s, so this isn't new, the thing that caught his attention was that some of the people dropping out of the service were not failing to lose weight. They were actually losing weight. But as their weight came down, their distress went up. And when he did detailed life interviews with them, he found out that childhood abuse was remarkably common and often came before the higher weight. Dr. Folletti's conclusion was extraordinary, and it was backed up by big numbers, but it's still not widely absorbed, understood or integrated into mainstream weight care. What he determined was that for many people, their weight wasn't the primary problem. It was a protective solution. One woman who had been raped gained 105 pounds in the following year, and she explained it with the line, "Overweight is overlooked, and that's the way I need to be." That makes a lot of sense. He also described many patients as having one foot on the brake and one on the gas, wanting to lose weight and fearing change at the same time. That's super common. I talk about ambivalence all the time in therapy. That's clients with their foot on the gas and the brake at the same time. But medicine has a funny habit of only wanting the bits it can measure comfortably. And that is one of my frustrations with this whole industry that we're working in at the moment. If a patient is eating for comfort, sedation, safety, stimulation, numbness, relief, or because food is just the fastest way for them to regulate their overloaded nervous system, that is not just a bit of comfort eating, a one-line note on a file. That's clinically central to why that person is sitting in front of you, and why they may struggle to follow your plan, and especially why they may regain the weight later, if none of that other stuff is addressed. Understanding weight and supporting a person properly means having to be able to look at grief, shame, abuse, neglect, nervous system dysregulation, eating disorders, ADHD, depression, trauma, social isolation, body shame, and the emotional function of food. And that is clearly a lot harder and a lot more expensive, let's be honest, than handing out a prescription, a leaflet or two on movement and nutrition, and congratulating ourselves because that person has now been treated for obesity. The More Than Weight report out of Yorkshire in 2025 makes the emotional and trauma side of weight impossible to ignore, like Dr. Folletti's report. In the More Than Weight report, 66% of respondents reported frequent emotional eating, and 78% had at least one mental health or neurodevelopmental condition, such as anxiety, depression, PTSD, or an eating disorder. People described food as therapy, comfort, and pain relief. One said, "Food is my therapy." Another said, "I eat when I'm happy, sad, stressed, tired. It's just my go-to." Another described coping with the sudden death of her fiancé by eating to block out the pain. And one of the most devastating lines in the report was, "The reason I'm fat is because I ate instead of self-harming. This body saved my life." Now, if you're working in weight management and you're hearing this kind of reality, but still think that emotional eating or trauma is somehow peripheral, and I'm just a hysterical therapist who just keeps banging on LinkedIn and YouTube, well, I don't know what to tell you. Because this, what I am talking about today, This is the work that needs to be done with the majority of your patients and clients. Now, to be clear, I am not saying every person in a larger body has trauma. That would be ridiculous. I'm also not saying that every person seeking support with their weight should be psychologized. That's also ridiculous. But I am saying that over 2/3 of patients are clearly telling us that food has been doing a regulating job, and sometimes their body itself has been doing a protective job. Now, let's bring GLP-1s into this, because this is where the conversation gets very current and very relevant. Reducing hunger and turning down food noise is not the same thing as resolving emotional eating. When a person has spent years, often decades, using food to regulate emotions, and suddenly their physical appetite is altered by medication, but the emotional triggers are all still there, that person is going to feel confused, flat, deprived, upset, bereft. Some people talk about feeling grief. Some describe feeling empty, talk about losing their best friend. Some talk about a kind of emotional free fall because the thing they always reach for no longer works in the same way. So now what do? The evidence is already here for anybody who's actually looking. People say things like, I didn't expect to grieve food like this, or the food noise is gone but now there's just emptiness, or my head hasn't caught up, no one warned me about this. So what should services do differently? Well, the first thing is not especially glamorous or life-changing, but it would transform care. I ask you to screen people properly. And this does not always have to be a big, complicated, resource-heavy process. Yes, there are validated tools, and they do matter. But at the most basic level, every person entering weight management should be asked about emotional eating and binge eating as part of their intake. And there are 3 very simple questions that I can give you for this. Do you ever eat for emotional reasons? If the person says yes, I would ask them, would you ever describe it as binge eating? And if they say yes to that, I would always ask them, would you ever purge or get sick afterwards, even if it's only irregularly? Now, that is not a full diagnostic eating disorder assessment, obviously, but it is a perfectly reasonable initial screen, and it would tell services far more than many are currently bothering to find out. Because once you know the answers to those questions, you can actually route that patient properly. If someone is struggling with emotional eating, is there someone on the team who can support that? If not, could somebody, or indeed more than one of the team, be trained in that? If you're an individual practitioner or a team and you do want help with that, obviously we can help with training, so do feel free to reach out and ask me. But if somebody meets the criteria suggesting binge eating disorder, then they may need a higher level of specialist support, and they probably need to be referred to an external service unless you do happen to have somebody on your team who can support them. And here's where I think services could be much more thoughtful with medication too. If someone does meet the criteria for either emotional or binge eating patterns, I think there's real value in beginning at a lower dose, enough to dampen the food noise and create a little space while that person starts to work on separating their food from their feelings. That is a very helpful level of intervention for somebody who is struggling with emotional eating or binge eating. And it could be an absolute game changer for a significant percentage of patients. Because now, in this context, the medication isn't been treated as the whole answer. It's been used as one support within a broader, more intelligent treatment plan. A plan that understands that behaviour has a function, that respects the nervous system, that gives this person half a chance of building something sustainable, rather than just going through the treatment of taking medication and losing weight, coming off the medication and putting all the weight back on again. So that is the invitation from the first part of this series. To stop asking only, how do we get the weight down? And start asking, what has food been doing for this person? And what has weight been doing for this person? Because if we do not understand that, we are never going to treat the whole problem. And we are certainly not treating or even seeing the whole person sitting in front of us. If you work in this area, and this is something your service is wrestling with, I would genuinely love to hear how you're thinking about it. And if you already know that your team could do with better support around emotional eating or binge eating, trauma-informed care, or GLP-1 wraparound support, you know where I am. Thanks for watching. Take care for now, and I'll see you on part 2.